All right, here we are. Live stream number 2. It's the middle of the day here on signing day. 12:30. The 12:30 live stream. The lunchtime live stream. In case you missed our earlier live stream, we had one at 8:45 a.m. We'll have another one later tonight, 8:30 p.m. And believe you me, we will have a drink during the 8:30 live stream, our weekly Panther-Lair show, tonight at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. But it's middle of the day. The way I kind of planned it out, I thought, all right, signing day really starts at 7 a.m. The letters start rolling in. Guys start signing with Pitt, and we'll gather and talk about that around 8:45. Most of the letters will be in by then, and they were. 16 out of about 16 out of 20 that were expected to come in were in by that point. And I said, okay, then we'll get together again around 12:30. It'd be a nice little lunchtime live stream, the old LTLS, as if you're into abbreviations. And then I figured at that point, all of the letters of intent, all the expected letters will be in, and they are. So it kind of worked out well. And then I figured we'll have the 8:30 live stream tonight, where we'll just kind of talk about everything, sort of big picture stuff, dig into specifics. We'll have a whole hour. This one, here, this 12:30 live stream, kind of like the 8:45, is going to be about a half hour or so, just to get caught up on everything, talk about some topics or anything that's sort of developed in the last few hours. And that's what we'll do here. And then we'll dig a little bit deeper. We'll settle in a little bit more tonight on the 8:30 live stream. But I figured we could chat here for a half hour or so before I have to head down to the south side to hang out with Pat Narduzzi for a while. Me and him and some of our friends in the media to talk about, everything going on in, with the recruiting class. Pat Narduzzi will hold his press conference at 2. So we'll make sure we're out of here in time to get down to the south side. So since we last hung out, I should say before we start, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, okay? You got the subscribe button. I put it right there on the screen for you. The like button is right there on the screen. I think the like is down over that way, and the subscribe button is right around there. Click that thing, like the video, and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. First of all, it would help me out, and I'd appreciate it. Second of all, if you subscribe and turn on your notifications, you won't miss any live streams like this. Maybe you didn't see on Twitter or on the message boards that we were going to do these extra live streams today. That we were going to have two extra live streams above what we usually do on a Wednesday. Maybe you missed that announcement. That's all right. You don't have to worry about it. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on your notifications, you'll get an alert sent to your phone. Hey, Panther-Lair's going live to talk about the recruiting class. Better tune in if you're so inclined. So make sure you do that. Click the subscribe, click the like. We appreciate it very much. Now, in the about 4 hours or so since we last hung out, 3.5, somewhere around there, the only real news, there were 4 outstanding letters that hadn't come in yet. Now, 2 of them were from California, and those guys couldn't sign until 10 a.m. Eastern time anyway. It's a local time zone, 7 a.m. local time for the recruits. So they couldn't sign by then anyway, so you were still waiting on those. And then the other ones you were waiting on was the transfer, Phil Dracovic, former Pine Richland star, transferring from Boston College. And then the expected one was Cruz Brookins, Steel Valley defensive back, who I think was probably already signed but hadn't announced it yet. He didn't do that until 10 a.m., which really he was supposed to do it at 10 and ended up being around 10:30. I went out to Steel Valley for that, and pretty much as soon as he announced, Pitt announced. So clearly the letter was already signed and faxed or emailed or however it may be, enough that Pitt could announce him officially. And that wrapped it up. So you're looking at 19, 21, 22. You're looking at 22 total guys, 19 recruits and 3 transfers. I lose track sometimes. I forget if we added this number or didn't add that number. 19 out of 20, or 22 total, 19 high school recruits, 3 transfers, all signed, sealed, and delivered. No surprises, no late switches. Even Cruz Brookins, who wasn't officially committed prior to today, was still pretty much expected to be committed. And I'll start by talking about Brookins. Just an outstanding athlete at Steel Valley. If you want to be impressed, first of all, go watch his film. The kid's all over the field. He's a running quarterback for Steel Valley. I talked to his coach, Ray Brazo, after Brookins' announcement, and he was like, look, Cruz Brookins is the kid who got things done when we needed something to get done. When we needed a play made, he was the guy who made it. He was the one who led Steel Valley to a perfect regular season record, an undefeated record all the way through the Whitfield playoffs. They didn't lose a game until they faced Westinghouse in the PAAA. I think it was the semifinals of the state playoffs. And Cruz Brookins was the one leading the way. They have other good players. It's Steel Valley's not a chump school, low talent school. They have other good players. While we were there, Greg Smith, a big offensive lineman, signed with Miami of Ohio. So he's a D1 guy as well, an FBS player, and probably has Power 5 potential. So it wasn't just Cruz Brookins. He wasn't the only one, but when they needed a play to be made, he was the guy who did it. And I think Pitt looks at him probably a little bit like the old staff, and to some extent this staff, looked at Dane Jackson coming out of Quaker Valley as a guy who they put the ball in his hands because he was the best athlete on the team. They put the ball in his hands because he was the guy who was going to make plays to help them win games. And ultimately, he projected a defensive back, and as we know, came in and had a great career at Pitt. He's played himself into an NFL player. I think they see something similar for Cruz Brookins. I don't know if Cruz Brookins is Dane Jackson. I don't know if he's the athlete that Dane Jackson is, but he's a really good player. And he's explosive. He is athletic, and he's going to play in the secondary. It sounds like they're talking to him about playing field safety, that sort of free safety roaming position, which he does a little bit of at Steel Valley. But I think he's athletic enough that he could line up at corner. He's a solid 6'2". He's got a big wingspan. He's a good player, and you add him. Even if you want to say, well, this was a late flyer, this was a project, this is a guy out of the, Western Pennsylvania, they didn't offer until the end of November and all this stuff. Even if you want to say that, if you take a guy with his athletic skills and his size and his playmaking ability, and you add him into a group that already has Shadarian Harrison and Jesse Anderson, that's a really, really good defensive back, a really good group of defensive back recruits. If Harrison and Anderson are the top end, you don't want to say sure things, but guys who seem really, really likely to pan out, you can then supplement them with a guy who maybe you're going to need to work with for a couple of years, who might, like Dane Jackson, might take a little time to settle into the game and become an effective college player. But I think all the tools are there, and all the things you would like to see from a young defensive back are there. And it doesn't hurt that he's a local guy. It doesn't hurt that there's a little bit of a legacy here of local defensive backs coming to Pitt and going on to the NFL. It doesn't hurt that you've got DeMar Hamlin in the NFL and Dane Jackson in the NFL and MJ Devonshire playing right now like he might get a shot to go to the NFL. It doesn't hurt that you have that, and it doesn't hurt to think about Cruz Brookins being the next guy in line to potentially follow that kind of path after a few years. I think it was a good ad. I think you could do a lot worse late in the cycle than a guy like Cruz Brookins. And I would say the same thing about some of their other late cycle ads, Maverick Grazio, or even Israel Polk. I think you could do a lot worse than the leading receiver on the number one high school football team in the country, a state championship team. I think you could do a lot worse than, Maverick Grazio, a guy who had 22 sacks as a senior. You could do worse than that. If you're going to take, I don't like to say like flyers or take chances. I don't want to be disrespectful to these kids, but if you're going to offer somebody late in the cycle and try to add them to your class, you could do a lot worse than the key, the engine driving an undefeated regular season, a Whitfield championship, and a bow out in the state semis. You could do a lot worse than a guy who had 22 sacks his senior year, and you could do a lot worse than the leading receiver on the number one team in the country. You could do a lot worse than that. And so I think as Pitt finished the class with those guys, plus Ty Diefenbach, a young, raw quarterback with, I think, a lot of potential, a lot of upside, it seems like a pretty solid finish to the class to add those, really, 1, 2, 3, 4 guys were really the late ads on top, in addition to Zion Fowler, who pulled the rare recommit. It's funny, with that sort of rash of decommitments that Pitt had, my phone, my computer kept wanting to, autocorrect decommit and decommitted to recommit and recommitted. And I kept saying, no, that's not what I mean. I mean decommitted. Well, now I actually had to type the word recommit because it actually happened. It's very rare, but it finally did. And it wasn't the only one. I think South Carolina had an offensive lineman who decommitted and then ended up signing. So it's pretty rare that you see it, but it does happen. And it happened for Pitt this year to get Zion Fowler in the class. But in terms of those late ads, I mean, really those four guys in particular, Polk, Diefenbach, Gracio, and Brookins, like those guys have the types of things you want to look for in a late addition to your class. I think they look like solid late ads. And I'm not talking about a late addition like Sam Okunlola, or Rashad Battle or a PJ O'Brien, or you go way back like a Keyshawn Camp, Rashad Weaver, guys where those were guys you were pursuing for a while. I'm talking about a late addition of a guy who just got an offer in the last week or 2 weeks, which is the case with those four guys that we're talking about here. And so I think solid late additions to the class. Of course, Jurkovec was the one that we the letter of intent was not in when we did the earlier show. And he, I think we've laid this out a couple times. There was really sort of like 3 goals for Frank Sinetti and the offensive staff this offseason when it comes to the quarterback room. And they wanted to get a veteran transfer who could be the starter in 2023, a young transfer who could come in, maybe a guy first or second year of college who could have a bunch of years left and could develop to take over as the starter after 2023. And then you wanted to get a high school recruit who could be the future, or at least you hope. And for the high school recruit, they got Ty Diefenbach. Frank Sinetti found him in California and brought him in. For the young transfer, they got Christian Vieira from Penn State, who's coming in after playing 2 years at State College. He'll have 3 years to play at Pitt. And then for the veteran transfer, of course, it's Phil Jurkovec from Pine Richland to Notre Dame to Boston College and now to Pitt for his final year of eligibility. And look, I mean, Jurkovec has always had the physical skills. There's no question about what he's able to do. He can run around a little bit. He can throw the ball really far. Seems like some good traits. I was talking with someone after he committed to Pitt, or right before he did, when it was pretty clear that he was going to go to Pitt. And they said, well, I don't know what he's going to do in Pitt's offense, but I know, at least once or twice a game, he's going to run around, break a bunch of tackles, and throw the ball 50 yards down the field or 60 yards down the field. I said, well, that's not bad. If you have a guy who could do that, you'd like him to be able to operate the offense as it is. But if you have that guy who can run around a little bit and break a bunch of tackles and heave it 65 yards or 55 yards down the field, you can do a few things with that. You can have some success playing like that. But Jurkovec, obviously the experience with Frank Sinetti here is the key. He played for Sinetti 2 years at Boston College. And I think that's a not unimportant thing to keep in mind. I mean, it played a factor for sure in Jurkovec picking Pitt. I don't think there's any question he picked somewhere where he knew the offense, where he was familiar with the offense, and would have a coordinator who knew him and knew how to use him. But I think for Sinetti, I think it's relevant that Sinetti honed in on Jurkovec because it speaks to what he thinks Jurkovec can do. There's a lot riding on this season for Frank Sinetti. I really believe that. I mean, last year was not good. 2022 offense was not good. Run game notwithstanding. Balance of the offense or whatever, it was not a good year for offense. You can pin at least 2 losses and, maybe more if you want to, almost exclusively on the offense. And that puts a lot of pressure, I think, on Frank Sinetti for 2023. It's got to get better. He's got to improve. This offense has to improve in 2023. And for Sinetti to say, pretty much right from the jump, this is the guy I believe can do it for us, that's quite an endorsement. I mean, he's putting a lot on Jurkovec working out at Pitt. Whatever pressure there is on Sinetti is getting transferred to this pickup of Phil Jurkovec. And Jurkovec may or may not feel that pressure that Sinetti is likely to feel, but the need for this move to work out is carrying a lot of that weight. So, I take that a couple ways. One, there's obviously a lot of pressure on both of those guys. But two, I think I sort of sit back and say, well, Sinetti knows what's riding on this next season. He knows how important it is that he turns the offense around and improves in year 2. And if he went out and said Jurkovec is the guy who can get this done for us, for me, then all right. You know, that's an endorsement that I'll take. Not necessarily that I'm just giving Frank Sinetti the benefit of the doubt on every quarterback he tries to get, but rather that, well, if he's willing to stake whatever the future is on this addition, then okay. And then we'll see how it works out with Dracovic in 2023. We'll see how it works out with Veer in 2024, presumably, and maybe 2025, because he'll have those 2 years both to play. And then we'll see where Ty Diefenbach goes and whatever they bring in 2024 and beyond out of high school recruiting. But, you know, in terms of needs for this class, you know, particularly the quarterback position, they kind of filled all three slots. And not in the worst way. You know, I mean, I think pretty reasonably, and with at least, you know, a couple of guys who I think have pretty high upside. I think there's a lot of optimism about what Christian Veer can be. Like, there's, you know, expectation that Phil Dracovic can finish his career on a high note working with Sinetti again. We'll find out. Let's get here, since we got about 15 minutes or so, let's get to the comments and questions, see what everybody's talking about. Byron Flex says, what was Phil Dracovic's NIL deal? He committed to Pitt one day after going into the portal. I don't know about NIL deals. I mean, I can't sit here and say, well, he's getting this or he's getting that. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, Byron. As to Dracovic going into the, you know, committing to Pitt one day after he entered the portal, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you can either read into it or not. You know what I mean? You can either look at it for the reality of the situation, or you can be naive about it. And I don't think I don't think as many rules get broken as people think, but I think there are a lot of ways to accomplish what you would accomplish by breaking the rules, but doing it around the rules. You know, I mean, we talk about tampering all the time. Pat Narduzzi talked about tampering all the time. Look, I don't think... I would say this. I would be shocked if Lincoln Riley ever spoke to Jordan Addison before he announced that he was in the transfer portal. I'd be shocked. You would have, I would be shocked. I would be shocked if anyone at USC spoke to Jordan Addison before he entered the transfer portal. But Lincoln Riley didn't need to talk to Jordan Addison. Nobody at USC needed to talk to Jordan Addison before he entered the transfer portal. There are so many ways to communicate without ever actually speaking directly from one party to another. You know what I'm saying? And so I've been taking your question about Pitt and Phil Dracovic and kind of running off the rails. I mean, like, look, I think Pitt was an obvious landing place for Dracovic from the time he decided to go in the transfer portal, a decision that was probably made before he actually entered the transfer portal. Obviously, Pitt makes sense. It's the hometown school. Obviously, it makes sense to go work with Frank Sinetti. You get back and get closer to home, and you work with a guy who was the coordinator when you had the best season of your career in college. And you've worked with him for 2 years. You know his offense. You know you can work with him. You know that he knows what you can do. And so I don't think it was a decision that needed a whole lot of investigation or NIL enticement. There probably was some kind of NIL. I don't know. But I don't think there was really a need for much to make it make sense for Phil Dracovic. Pitt was an obvious option for those reasons. Eric Rogers says, could you see Anderson possibly doing the Whitehead role, playing both sides of the ball? Possibly. I asked him about that. I asked him if the coaches... we'll have an interview with Jesse Anderson that I'll post probably later this afternoon. We'll see. We got a lot going on. I asked him if the coaches have said, hey, we might try and use you on offense sometimes too. And he said, they just kind of joke about it. But I would definitely be down for it. I think more often than not, coaches look at it, these Pitt coaches in particular, and say, we want you to get on the field at your actual position first. We want you to learn all the things about your position first before we start splitting your practice time and your meeting time with, some time spent in the running back room or the receiver room. We want you to learn how to play safety first. We want you to learn how to play defensive back first before we start, throwing you all over the place and taking time away. Look, if you go spend a half hour with Andre Powell, that's a half hour you could have been spending with Corey Sanders. And that's a half hour less that you're spending learning the position that's actually going to, constitute the bulk of your snaps on the field. So maybe, but for the most part, probably not. I mean, I think Jordan Whitehead's the only guy we've seen do that, right? Brandon George took a few snaps at fullback. Are we going to count that? Rashad Wheeler. Remember Rashad Wheeler? Rashad Wheeler was an offensive lineman, though. He took a few snaps at fullback, I think in the 2019 season. But I think he was already on the offensive line anyway. They want guys to do what they're good at, and they want guys to learn their position because they're going to be of more value to the team if they can actually play their position than if they can maybe take one or two snaps on the other side of the ball. Brock McDonagh says, will you be releasing interviews with everyone that is signed during the day? Really enjoyed those the past couple years. Yeah, Brock, we've got a few loaded up. I actually, just before we started this, live stream, I was just doing a quick interview with Isaiah Neal that is, processing on YouTube as we speak. As soon as I get done here, we'll get that loaded, and I've got 6 or 7 done so far. We're going to keep working through the class as we get through the rest of the week. But yeah, those will start rolling out this afternoon, Brock, so you can keep an eye out for those. Joe New says, is this anywhere near a top 25 class? I think if you are asking that, it's because you already know the answer. Scott Eisenberg says, what do you make of this O-line class? It's interesting. I think there's guys I think there's good potential. Tyree is a big athletic offensive tackle. BJ Williams is a smart player. Dave Borbely likes him to play center. I think Ryan Coretta had some Power 5 options, was considered a heavy Michigan State lean before he took his official visit to Pitt. Actually, he took his official visit to Pitt first and then went and saw Michigan and Michigan State after that and ended up committing to Pitt, which was, I think, a coup for Pitt because usually that last visit, in this case Michigan State, tends to be the one that really resonates and kind of ends up winning. But in this case, Pitt impressed him and got his commitment. I think it's hard with offensive linemen. I think it's hard to project all but the very, very tippy top elite guys. It's hard to project because so much of it comes down to how their bodies are going to hold up, how their bodies are going to adapt and adjust, how they can shape and mold their bodies, how they take to the coaching, there's so much that goes into it. I think that offensive line is probably the most difficult position to project high school to college. Guys, you can see if guys are big, you can see if guys can move, but for the vast majority of college football teams, they're taking guys based on that potential of whether they're big and they can move. Because there's so much that it's difficult to project. And so I would say that about this offensive line class too. Roger Mosley says this class shows that Pitt is not a destination for the top talent. Disappointing as a Pitt fan. I would disagree. No, they didn't get any 5-star kids. I would say Jordan Bass is a top talent. I would say Shadarian Harrison is a top talent. Isaiah Neal is already a 4-star prospect. All 3 of those guys should be 4-star prospects. Isaiah Neal, Shadarian Harrison, and Jordan Bass should all be 4 stars. I think that a guy like Lamar Seymour is a pretty high-end receiver talent. I think Kenny Johnson is too. I think there's good talent in this class. We've seen Pitt recruit similar classes and turn it into an ACC championship. Now, that doesn't mean that you want to recruit that kind of class every year, a class that's ranked outside the top 40 or outside the top 50. But we've seen that maybe this staff has an eye on what it wants, particularly on defense. And I said this during the early show too. I think, or maybe during the morning pit, these things are all going to run together. I don't remember when I said this, but I think particularly on defense, this staff has earned the benefit of the doubt. That the guys they're getting are guys who they feel like really fit what they want to do, and they're probably going to be right because they have been a bunch of times, and they've built some really, really good defenses. So when we look at, Jesse Anderson and Jordan Bass and Shadarian Harrison are all 3-star recruits, but you watch them play and you think about how they'll function in Pitt's defense with these coaches in this system, and you say, all right, they'll probably be pretty good. Probably a pretty decent chance of them being pretty good. Isaiah Neal, like I said, is already a 4-star defensive tackle prospect. I think there's good talent in this class. Did they attract the top talent? Did they get a top 100 guy? No. Did they get a top 250 guy? I forget where Isaiah Neal ended up. But other than him, possibly, no, they didn't. But they got a lot of guys that they prioritized early. And I think they got some really talented players. I think the top end of this class is really good and has a chance to really contribute positively at Pitt over the years. X Marks 97 says, who's the non-quarterback transfer? It's Donovan McMillan, former Peters Township 4-star, went to safety for 2 years. And he's transferring back now, potentially to be the boundary safety. Looks like that's what he's going to do. Let's see. Spuds M says, I'm not going to go down the NIL conversation again. We could talk about that more tonight. We're running low on time here. I want to keep this moving. David Steen asks about Pat Narduzzi's comments about other teams trying to buy Drake May. Let's talk about that tonight. I think that's a good conversation we can dig into with a few more minutes than that. Andy Brabender says, it's at best debatable if Pitt had a recruiting bump this recruiting season after winning the ACC. Do you anticipate the bump to come next year? This recruiting bump conversation can probably go on for a while. I think they got something of a bump. You know what I mean? And I already know the responses to this, so just don't even bother with it. But look, getting as far as they got with Hakeem Williams, a 5-star wide receiver, that was a recruiting bump. They didn't get him, but they got a hell of a lot further than they did with any other 5-star receiver. When was the last time they got that far with a 5-star receiver? Got him on campus for 2 unofficial visits plus an official visit. Tell me the last 5-star receiver who did that. And it was anybody since Jonathan Baldwin in 2008. That's a recruiting bump. You know, they got a 5-star wide receiver from Florida on campus twice for unofficial visits, which means he pays his own way plus an official visit. That's a recruiting bump. Guys like Jordan Bass, guys like Isaiah Neal, guys like Ryan Coretta, guys like Lamar Seymour, guys like Kenny Johnson, some of the guys they had committed that they couldn't hold on to, Bryce Pollock and Shelton Lewis. This is evident. I mean, that was recruiting momentum. Now, they lost some of those guys, and so the momentum wasn't strong enough to hold them, but it's still a bump. They recruited at a higher level this year than they had in previous classes. And I think that's, I mean, quite frankly, it's undeniable. I mean, I think when you look at offer sheets and you look at the caliber of players that they were after and the schools they were competing with to get them, they were winning recruiting battles this year that they did not win in the past. And they were landing recruits of a certain caliber that they weren't landing in the past. I think there was a recruiting bump. It didn't turn into 5 stars in a top 15 class. You know, and I think I probably said that. I probably said that I thought this would be a class that could rank in the top 25. That it probably would rank in the top 25 with a chance to move into the top 20. And part of that took a hit when they missed out on Rodney Gallagher and Tamir Robinson. Those were 2 big losses. Local guys, Western Pennsylvania guys who ended up going to, you know, West Virginia and Penn State respectively. So the recruiting bump happened. It might not have looked the way the most optimistic among us expected it to, but I think it did happen. All right, a couple more questions here. Let's see. Brock McDonagh says, during these past 2 days leading up to today, was there any real concern of Jordan Bass holding off on signing today with Pitt? Yeah. I don't know in the last 2 days, but certainly over the last week or two, you know, as I know, Brock, I think you probably read it on Panther-Lair.com. I mean, there was a real possibility that he might delay his signing until February, which would be the kiss of death. And it was the same thing with Shadarian Harrison. I think they came very close, and they had to work really hard. And it's a credit to guys like Corey Sanders with Shadarian Harrison, and then on the with Jordan Bass, like linebacker coach Ryan Manilak, assistant linebacker coach Mickey Jacobs, I think did a great job connecting with Jordan Bass and his family. And those guys worked really hard to keep Bass in the class, just like keeping Harrison in the class. And I think there was a chance that both of those guys would delay their signing until February, which would mean they weren't going to Pitt. And I think even at certain points over the last 2 weeks, I think they might have told the Pitt coaches they weren't signing until February, which would have iced the cake there. So holding on to those guys, I think, is a big recruiting win, because I wasn't sure if it was going to happen, to be honest. I mean, if you had asked me on December 1st, were they definitely going to sign both Shadarian Harrison and Jordan Bass, I would have said probably not. They'll probably get one of them and maybe miss on both. I said I would have said the least likely outcome was that they sign both. But that's what they did. So, all right, that's a half hour here. Listen, we will be live again at 8:30 tonight to dig into all these topics. We'll talk about NIL. We'll talk about the recruiting class. We'll talk about everything you want to talk about right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video, click the subscribe button. There it is. Click that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications so you never miss anything. We're going to have some interviews coming up here shortly. We've got Isaiah Neal. You see him on the screen right there. We're going to release that pretty much as soon as I get done with this live stream. So check that out. And yeah, we'll have some more throughout the day. Jordan Bass, actually. We've got him lined up for an interview as well. So we will release that this afternoon. Pat Narduzzi's got his press conference in an hour. I'm going to head down there very shortly. And then we'll be back for the live stream tonight, 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, all day, every day for your Pitt football, basketball, and recruiting news. Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in for this lunchtime live stream. It's been a lot of fun. And come back tonight, 8:30. We will be live for a nice, relaxed hour of Pitt sports talk on the Panther-Lair Show right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again.